It's February 15th, 2023. I turned on this morning. I found this is the credits of whatever this is on Story Television. If I go back just a little. Mom. One second. One second. It has this reading. It says, "His afflicted family, his mortal remains, unrivaled genius, Arter of the globe, firearms that ever." And then it goes into G monument to his lished in every QU, greatest artist in ed, as the founder trade and as a, and then there's an MO.
To John Andrew, we had to put that grave back exactly as it was because he was the king. And as Elvis was the king of music, Joe was the king of the gun trade.
And this credits the Royal Armouries in Leeds, Royal Arsenal in London, London Proof House, and Military Odyssey. I'm not quite sure what that's a reference to. When I hit the info button, it comes up as the master, and it says Joseph Manton, Master Gunsmith. The original air date was January 7th, 2008. So it has a significant numerical numerology mention. I know, again, this morning I was watching Andrew Wommack speaking about the gospel, and he went into in great detail Joseph and Benjamin. Now, Benjamin, of course, being my first son, is extremely ear catching. So I'm going to put that piece on as well, with this mention of this Joseph that I had never heard of before, but now it's in my conscious awareness. Now, this is Andrew Wommack, and it's the E34. This is the beginning of it.
About the
And then it goes,
Pharaoh, about this man, how he would just put a person who was despised, for his ethnicity, and put him in the second most high position in the entire land. It shows a lot about Pharaoh. It also shows that there was a lot of prejudice among the people during the time. And it says something about Joseph, that even though he had to eat separate, he didn't make a big deal out of this. Again, I could spend a lot of time on this, but there are racial and religious and economic and all kinds of social different prejudices in our world today.
and now for me, that ties in. My question is more, is that part of the fee, fi, fo, fum? And by fee, I mean PHE here in the giant, and the FI somewhere else in the fee, fi.
Today. And the average way that people deal with that is to sit there and say, "You owe me respect." I believe it's just the opposite. That instead of us complaining and griping about it and being bitter about it, what you need to do is just earn respect. Joseph had been so faithful. He interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. He had been put in this position, and he was
Now, my question is, if I think of aerospace and I think about time on a linear fashion between point A and point B, if some distal point in the future, being point B from the point A, if I'm orientating myself correctly, is the point B somewhere in the future, in the distal from my proximal, is that considered like a flash frozen dream for those that know where the aerospace is broken in order to correct the proximal position? because I'm currently, and since I've been here, had a proximal position problem, and it's grown worse the more distal from the original entry point that I arrived. I know that there's somebody capable and available that does know these things. I'm just not quite sure why the distal point from my proximal point was in the flash frozen dream of what may be, when it ended in this result of this 1976 and 1975 problem. Why was it not corrected originally?
It was over. All of these Egyptians, he was their master. He could have put them to death, and yet he allowed them to eat separate from him, and he didn't force and say, you shouldn't be treating me this way, and demand that they do all of those things. He just did what God gave him opportunity to.
And again, is this talking about land of exiles? I'm just curious, because Statue of Liberty on this side of the water is referred to. I just found out recently the new rumor is she's called Mother of Exiles. I don't know if I'm accepting that or not personally in my own belief system, but it just ties into this possibility.
You can do and earn respect. You know, Tony Dungy, who's a black man, he's one of the Hall of Fame coaches in the NFL. And James Brown and Tony Dungy are good friends of mine. And I remember Tony Dungy talking about his father would not sit there and complain about the racial prejudice that was against them. That his father was unable to ride in the bus unless he sat at the back of the bus. And so rather than suffer that shame and rejection, he just chose to walk everywhere he went. And he told Tony, he said, don't sit there and complain about the problems that you have. You just earn people's respect. You go ahead and live a godly life. And when Tony finally won one of the Super Bowls and they were on the bus going to the White House, his father sat on the bus, on the front seat of the bus, and went to the White House and met the president and all of these things. And that happened because they maintained the right attitude. And if there's many other blacks, and again, I'm not saying that there aren't problems and prejudices, but there's many blacks that just sit there and have a chip on their shoulder and they're going to fight and gripe and complain. You are not going to be promoted the way that Joseph was, if that's your attitude. Here's Joseph, who was their master. He was over them, and yet they wouldn't eat with him because that was a social taboo, and he didn't gripe or complain about it. He just dealt with the situation and went on, and God promoted him. Then there's a great lesson to learn from Joseph right here. And let me just also say that this isn't just racial. It's not based on ethnicity. Did you know when I was in the Army, because I witnessed to people, I took a stand for the Lord, they called me preacher. And I would go into a mess hall and sit down, and people would be sitting there. And when I sat down, they'd pick up their trays and they'd leave, and they'd just leave me by myself. I actually went about 6 or 8 weeks without one single person talking to me. They hated me because I had taken a stand and I was rejected. And we had a race riot when I was in basic, and the blacks outnumbered the whites over 2-1, and they blocked the doors, and they took every single white in the barracks, and they beat their head on the concrete, and there's so much blood flowed, it clogged up the drain on this concrete floor, and it began to back up because so much blood had flowed. And did you know that I am the only white person in that entire barrack? I think there was 100 people in the barracks, 50 on each side, and probably 60 of them, 70 of them were blacks, and the rest of us were white. And anyway, I'm the only white guy who didn't get sent to the infirmary, and it's because the guy who was beating everybody up, he was a pimp in the world, and he was just this vicious guy. But I had witnessed to him, and it turned out his father was a Baptist preacher, and he knew that what he was doing wasn't right. And even though he was drunk, and he started this riot and sent, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 white guys to the infirmary When he came over, he grabbed me on my bunk, helped pick me up, and was going to beat me up the way he had everybody else. And he looked at me, and I believe that God reminded him that I testified to him, and he just threw me back on his bunk, fell over on his bunk, and it was over. And I'm the only guy that didn't get beat up. I'm saying this to say that it's not just, whites toward black. There's prejudice from blacks. There's prejudice from Hispanics. There's prejudice on people because of the way you talk, because of where you came from. There's all kinds of stuff. It's not the skin, it's just sin. That's what this friend of mine, E.W. Jackson, is always saying. And I've been a recipient of racial prejudice, and I've been hated and stuff. And yet, you know what? I'm not bitter, and I'm not angry. I'm just saying that there's a lesson to be learned here. Joseph was an abomination to the Egyptians, and yet he was second in command over all of Egypt because of his attitude and because he didn't let that get on the inside of him, and he didn't make an issue out of it. Boy, that's great. Again, I could probably talk about that much, much more. In verse 33, it says, and they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright. This is talking about when the brethren came into his house and they had them sit at tables. They had them sit according to their birthright. Look at that.
Numerically in this Genesis, which I've never even heard before, and by name, calling out name, I'm grappling at the moment with how it fits in with who else knows about this.
That's what this is saying. They sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth.
And my other question is, they mentioned the father and the mother, and I'm like, now are they going to get the fat her, the one that was actually fat that birthed the him out of the her? Are they going to get that part confused with the M and the other?
And the men marveled one at another. Now, if you aren't careful, you'll just skip over this and miss it. But here are these 11 brothers that are brought to Joseph's house, and Joseph seated them according to their firstborn, secondborn, third, fourth, fifth, all the way down to the 12th. They were all in their birth order, and they marveled at it. How did Joseph know this? Now again, you could just skip over this and think it was coincidence, but it wasn't. Joseph had them seated. He recognized exactly who his brothers were and who.
And what do I believe? I believe that the Len, L-E-N, that came to the Glen, G-L-E-N, who gave the book of Joshua, is seated somewhere still, and still making noise on my behalf to try to protect me and the children moving forward.
He was the firstborn, secondborn, and when he had them seated according to their birth order, they realized something was up. How was this happening? And the next verse says, and he took and sent messes, this is talking about portions of food unto them from before him, but Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him.
Why was Benjamin's mess 5 times more than the rest? Why didn't they fix in this flash frozen dream in a distal from the proximity of entry? Why didn't they fix his sojourner or his journey in the correct way? What is going on in larger aerospace and dynamics that the birth order and birth alignment and the journeys are becoming increasingly dangerous when the children arrive?
This is signifying they were not only seated according to their birth order, but then Benjamin was preferred above all the others. 5 times as much food sent to him. And that's because Benjamin was the flesh and blood of Joseph, from the same father and mother. These other brothers were half brothers. They were from different mothers. They were all the same father, but they were different mothers. So there was just a union. And plus, I believe that Benjamin wasn't involved in those brothers who tried to kill.
Now, does that have to do with nationality or and like the motherland, fatherland, or is that actually physical BOD entity
Kill
at GOD?
Joseph and eventually sold him into slavery. Benjamin was still at home. He was very young at the time that this happened to Joseph. And so Benjamin was not one of the other 10 brothers who had rejected Joseph and had caused all of this. And so the way that he seated them according to their birth order, the way that he preferred Benjamin and sent him 5 times as much food as anybody else, man, that just grabbed their attention. They were looking at this and wondering what is going on. They knew that something was not normal. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they knew that this was supernatural, really. It was not just normal, the things that were happening. And so in the 44th chapter, after they had eaten and made merry with Joseph, then it says that he dismissed them.
This is the Bible translation according to now. I hear that there's a New Testament, Old Testament argument that they're unhappy with. Is that the difference between the proximal entry point and the distal flash frozen dream that could have been corrected, but now has been misused in some form of strategy of some point and seems increasingly dangerous and messy?
And gave them their grain that they wanted, and they headed for home. But Joseph, after they had left, he told his steward of his house, he says, you put my cup, his golden cup, in the mouth of that youngest son, Benjamin, and you put it in the sack, at the top of the sack. And then he sent them away. And not long after they had departed, well, then this steward of the house came after them, and he accused them of stealing this golden cup that Joseph drank from. And the brothers got angry and said, you're accusing us of stealing. He says, how dare you do this? And he says, man, if anybody has stolen anything, then let him just die right here. We'll allow him to be killed, and all the rest of us will become slaves to Joseph. And so the steward said, all right, according to your word. And so he started at the oldest, Reuben, and then went to Simeon and Levi, Judah, right on down all the way to Benjamin's sack. And when he got to Benjamin's sack, there was Joseph's golden cup. And the men just cried out, what has happened to us? And the steward says, I'm going to take Benjamin and make him a slave because he stole this. And they said, no, you can't do that. And they explained how that they had promised the father that they would bring Benjamin back. So they all put all of their sacks back together. They laded all of their animals and headed back to Egypt to try and deal with this situation. And so they all came back to Joseph's house. And man, I'm running short of time here today. I'm not sure that I'll be able to do this justice on today's program, but let me just begin to start dealing with this. Here in Genesis chapter 44, and in verse 9, it says, this is the 11 brothers talking. It says, with whosoever thy servants it be found, talking about this cup of Joseph, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. And he, the steward of Joseph's house, said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and he shall be blameless. And they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, opened every man his sack, and he searched and began at the eldest and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes, which of course back in those days was a way of showing extreme grief and sorrow. They rent their clothes and laded every man his ass and returned to the city. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that ye have done? Wot ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? In other words, certainly discern that my cup was missing. And Judah said, what shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak, or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, talking about slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. And he goes on and makes quite a confession here. And this is really a point that I want to center up on, so I'm not going to be able to get into it because we're out of time today. But this is amazing. He said, our iniquity had found us out. In other words, what we did to our younger brother, the things that we've done. Judah had committed incest, Reuben had committed incest, Simeon and Levi had murdered hundreds of men. It's finally catching up with us. God is holding us accountable, and they begin to repent. It had been 22 years since Joseph had these dreams, and it was longer than that. It was before that time when they actually murdered these people in the town of Shechem, and here they are finally coming to repentance.
Now, Benjamin is, I think, 23 now, so the 22 makes sense. I'm 44, so Genesis 44 makes sense. Not that I would have wished it this way, not that I would have wanted it this way, not that I authorized it to go this way as if I had free will and a choice, which it doesn't look like my entire life I've even had. Yesterday, yesterday I put up the multi-symbols. I've used the square root of 9 before to reference the two of us. I've also used these symbols in order to reference in a spatial way, not a geological way, but in a spatial way, in like aerodynamics, and like in a quirky, charmed kind of way, like a CERN, CERN. Now, in local news, they came home, my son came home with the youngest one. Now they took Benjamin, Daniel, and Alexander and gave them to a stranger, as far as I'm concerned, a person who tried to murder me and who caused this disruption to occur in the first place that I never wanted, was not my choice of partner, and I did not marry for love. That's how I explain it. But so in this local news, it says it's called the CASA, CASA program with APEC. And the local congressperson, it says, PS 31Q is proud to announce that through the generosity of the council member Palladino, we have received the Cultural After School Adventures grant, providing our students with an after-school program in partnership with the Alley Pond Environmental Center. So it's been 6 weeks. So I thanked the people. I saw them leave one day with my son, and I thanked them for their time and care in coming and showing them the animals, how much my son absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really great program. And I thanked them for putting this type of thing on for the children, because again, my son doesn't really have much of anything. And so it's nice to have these features. And so she had suggested that I call the council member. So I couldn't remember. So I have the notice, but there's no phone number. So I'm going to try calling the council member. But this is the school, and so thank you to the council member. But I'll try reaching out just to thank, for, I don't know, am I supposed, this is a blessing, I'm assuming, something nice that the locals have done. So anyhow, so I don't know, with this SAC, SAC, and in big, like Arrow, again, when I went to spring break with Dan in Florida, like Len was in the kitchen and there was a Blue Princess phone from the kitchen table that we sat at when he gave me the book of Joshua. Not sure what that really meant. Not sure if he's arguing on my behalf or to my behest. I have no access to him. He's lived his entire career somewhere else, one-time meeting, and then just disappears. But I know that there are forces in the world that know, and these little cues are helpful, of what I actually experienced in this life frame, along with all of the attacks that I've personally been part of, that sometimes I can't even remember the attacks because they anesthetized me, or they, I don't know, um, chemically induced some form of paralysis while they performed I don't know what. Um, I've heard um, I've heard some disgusting stories about humans and things that they've done and things that they're allowed to do in other places, that you never think are going to affect you here, but yet they do. Um, and then there's nobody to discuss this with, because who do you bring it up with? Like, who is the family rep? Who's the community rep? These things are not clear. Um, or at least they have not been made clear to my person. They just continuously keep getting worse and keep happening. Um, so it's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.